So to get to the neighborhood that I grew up in, you have to drive down this old dirt road a couple of miles and past some small farms. Right outside of the neighborhood entrance was this spooky house that was shrouded by a cluster of giant oak trees. A red and white Jeep from the 1960s sat outside, and there were never any lights on, the blinds were always closed, etc. Well, I ended up meeting the man who lived here several times. Sometimes he slowly followed me in his Jeep while I was on my bike. One time, he showed up at my house to watch me jump on my mini trampoline in the front yard and grabbed my arm. Other times, he would sit in his Jeep at 6 a.m. and stare at me while I stood at the bus stop. A creepy hand once pressed against my window screen. The entirety of what happened is in my no sleep story. I just want to focus on the two main scary occurrences. My Uncle Dave is super awesome in a really goofy sort of way. He's always playing pranks on me. He once convinced me that a hot pepper was a pickle and got me to down one at Chili's, which prompted me to wash my own mouth out with soap in the restroom. He lived in CT, and when my family moved down south to this neighborhood, we didn't see much of him. One weekend, after several encounters with the creepy guy, Uncle Dave announced that he was coming for a visit and would be staying in our guest room. My mom let me stay up late to wait for his flight to arrive. However, after seeing me fall asleep on the couch several times, she ordered me to bed and said that I could see Uncle Dave when I woke up. In the middle of the night, I woke up with this eerie feeling. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and goosebumps covered my body. I had this uneasy feeling of being watched. Stiff as a board and trying not to move my head, lest I announce to the watcher that I was awake and aware of its existence, I moved my eyes around the room to look for anything out of the ordinary. My nightlight was on in the corner of my room, which created a pretty decent glow in my room. It was really easy to make out the details of my Beanie Baby collection, my desk, my dresser, and the man crouched next to the dresser. Okay, WTF, my little mind thought. I could see this guy with dark hair sitting with his back against the wall and his right side leaning against the dresser. His knees were pulled close to his body, and I could see his teeth and the whites of his eyes gleaming. He was facing me. I stared at him for a long time, and he didn't move. At first, I was terrified. Then I remembered. Uncle Dave, of course. He always pranks me. It's his life mission. He's probably trying to trick me again. If I cry or scream, he'll get up laughing and will shout, "Gotcha!" I can't let Uncle Dave win. I stared at him a while, and he didn't move a muscle. He never gave up the game. After what felt like hours, I felt this sense of dread fill me. As much as Uncle Dave loves pranking me, I can't picture him staying up all night long to do this weird, creepy prank. A small voice in my head tried to convince me it was someone else, not Uncle Dave. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. I peeked, and I saw the man was still there. He wasn't a figment of my imagination. I closed my eyes again and imagined myself shouting for my mom and how she'd dash in and rescue me. Even if this was Uncle Dave, I wanted no part in the prank. At some point, after hours of adrenaline, I crashed and fell asleep. When I awoke in the morning, I immediately checked by the dresser and saw no one. Feeling relief wash over me, I felt firmly convinced it was Uncle Dave being dumb again. Leaping out of bed and rushing out of my room, I ran into the living room gleefully shouting, "Ha ha, Uncle Dave, you didn't get me. That was the dumbest prank ever." My mom turned to me with this weird look on her face and told me that Uncle Dave was still in CT because his flight was delayed. I figured my mom was in on the prank too and told her what happened, insisting that Uncle Dave was here. When she shook her head no, I felt a wave of horror wash over me as I tried to figure out who that was in my room. My mom told me I was just imagining things, as she wouldn't entertain me. Flash forward a bit later, I'm again in my bed. My nightlight is on. I'd somewhat forgotten about the creepy man and was more focused on stuff like Captain Planet and Game Boy. I woke up in the middle of the night to that same eerie feeling. I checked by the dresser, but I didn't see anything. Feeling relieved, I settled back into bed and tried counting sheep. While laying there, I saw a slender hand creep up the side of my comforter from under the bed. It felt around, looking for something to grab onto. At that second, every alarm system in my body was screaming, except for, of course, my mouth. I tried so many times to open my mouth and shout, but nothing would come out. I felt paralyzed. The hand was on my bed for probably only 5 minutes, but it felt like the longest 5 minutes of my life. I laid there, petrified and fantasizing about running out of the room or calling for my mom, but I couldn't get my mouth or legs to work. Instead, I lay there frozen like a wuss. I eventually was able to call for my mom, but in the middle of shouting, "Mom!" my nightlight turned off. I don't remember what happened after that, but I think I fainted from fright. When I woke up, I stood up on my bed and took a flying leap, then ran out of my room and into the living room to tell my mom what had happened. My dad checked under my bed and again told me it was all my imagination. Despite my mom trying to convince me I was crazy, I was firmly convinced that a man had been in my room, not once, but twice. After that, I would start sprinting from my bedroom door and then take a flying leap mid-room, landing with a thud in my bed. I was convinced if I didn't do this, if I walked up to my bed like a normal person, someone hiding under my bed would grab my ankles. I had a bed skirt on my bed, so it was impossible to look underneath for any creepy lurkers. As time went on, other things happened. Some person stood in the pitch black of my backyard one night and made human meowing noises at my window. Someone tapped on my window. The screen on my window had been pried open. I saw the red Jeep parked in front of our house several times. When I finally told my mom about the red Jeep, she went white and started making all of these phone calls. Apparently, the guy who lived in the dark house had been previously accused of R-wording a child, though not convicted, but was convicted of indecent exposure. The court took away his driver's license and had him registered as a sex offender. When my mom heard he was violating his conditions and following kids in the neighborhood in his car, she called the cops. The cops went to his house and ended up searching it. Inside, they found this weird wooden chair with a large hole on the seat. Allegedly, this guy would ask the neighboring farm girls to sit on the chair. He would lie on the ground underneath the chair, looking up their dresses. Sometimes he would ask the farm children to defecate through the hole and would promise gifts. One kid got a new bike out of it. Apparently all of the kids from the farms knew about this guy and his chair, but never once reported him because they liked getting free stuff. I don't know what his name is or where he is now. I tried Googling some keywords with my old neighborhood to see if anything pops up, but I couldn't find anything. I also have no idea if he was the guy who was in my room, but after hearing about him and remembering how he would follow me to my house in his Jeep, I became pretty convinced that he was the guy who had hid in my room twice. This happened about 8 years ago. I was 16 and had 2 friends living with me so they could go to college. They were from out of town and loved the beach. I live on the coast. The beach is like a home for my mom, and she used to walk on the beach and collect shells almost every day. One day we went, and my mom went to a bar that was close to where we had parked so she could have a beer. About 30 minutes goes by, and my mom still hadn't come back to the car, so we went to check on her. She was acting very weird and saying things that didn't make any sense. There was a guy with her who was obviously in a biker gang. Huge dude, by the way, tatted everywhere. Leather vest, probably 6'5", 250 pounds. I would assume the guy thought that she was alone at the bar from the look on his face when my friends and I went to check on my mom. I told my mom it was time to go, but she didn't want to leave the guy. She kept saying she wasn't leaving unless he came with us. We got staff at the bar to tell her it's time to go and that she's too drunk to drive. I didn't have a license at the time, so one of my friends had to drive. Okay, so this is where things start to get really weird. We're on the way home, and my mom keeps looking at her hands and asking us why they're moving. She was moving her fingertips around, so we were just telling her she was drunk, and they're moving because she's moving them. We didn't really think much of it. She also kept telling us she only had 2 beers. We get home, and my mom gets out of the car and sits down in the driveway. There was a child riding a tricycle across the street from us, and my mom said, "Hey, little kid, you're not old enough to have a license. You shouldn't be driving." We thought it was funny at the time because we thought she had just overdone it on the alcohol. We get her inside and put her in her bed and tell her to go to sleep. We went back to my room to play some video games and chill. About 30 minutes goes by and we hear something break and my mom started screaming. It wasn't like a normal scream. It was terrifying. Just writing this gives me chills, thinking about how it sounded. We ran into her room, and she had broken a glass of water that we poured for her by her bed. When we got into her room, she stopped screaming and stared blankly at the wall, just mumbling shit that didn't make any sense. She would glance at us, but you could tell that her mind wasn't there. There was a blankness in her eyes, and her pupils were huge. I hadn't messed with drugs at all at this point, and neither had my friends, so at the time, we didn't think much of it. We get her to lay back down and try to sleep. Before we left the room, she was just staring at the ceiling, moving her jaw around. We went back to my room and talked about what we were going to do. We started to get scared because we knew something wasn't right. About 10 minutes goes by and we hear the car start. My friend stayed with her at the car, trying to convince her to unlock the door and give them the key. I ran down to a neighbor and I asked them to help because something was wrong with my mom. She ended up backing out of the driveway and got about halfway down the street and slammed her brakes. We were going to break her car windows, jump in, and turn the car off, but she just unlocked the door, stepped out of the car, and walked home. We drove the car back to the driveway, and I put the keys in my pocket. When we walked inside, she was sitting on the edge of her bed again with a blank stare, but was kind of twitching. We went back to my room again, and were talking about how crazy this situation was. About an hour goes by, so we started thinking everything was calm and she was asleep, until we heard breaking glass. We went to the kitchen, and she had quietly opened the dishwasher, taken frozen food from the freezer, and grabbed a pack of computer paper. She was throwing plates at the wall and putting frozen food and computer paper into the dishwasher. When we asked her what she was doing, she just looked over at us with a long blank stare and continued what she was doing without giving us an answer. After that, we got her back to her room and I monitored her until I was sure she went back to sleep. I stayed in her room for a couple of hours and then went to my room and went to sleep. The next morning, she called me and was freaking out. She didn't remember anything and didn't know how she got home. Apparently, she had given the guy from the bar her number, and he was calling her from random numbers all morning. We went to CVS and got a drug test just to verify that she was drugged. She had roofies and PCP in her system. When we called the bar to get security footage so we could try to find out who the guy was, they told us that their security cameras were broken. This was 5 to 6 years ago. After meeting with a couple of friends who were stationed near the bar, my friend Robin and I decided to end girls' night early, 1 a.m. I'm horrible with street names, so bear with me. We went to Rocket Bar, so you can know it was near there. We got in the car and started pulling out. We were driving a bit slow because we weren't too familiar with the area, so we didn't want to miss any turns. I had the window rolled down because when I drink, I get a bit flushed. The street we were on was a bit dead at the time. We heard a yell and some loud-ass crying. It was clearly a lady's voice, so we slowed down to see what was going on. Robin was driving, and I was in the passenger seat. On our right, we saw this lady stumble out of the street, holding her chest and crying. Robin locked the doors and cautiously rolled my window up, leaving only an inch open, thank God. The lady came right up to my window and said, "I need help." I asked, "What's wrong, honey?" And she kept repeating, "I need help," over and over again. Me, being a naive idiot, put my hand on the door like I'm about to open it, only to be grabbed by Robin, whispering, "Don't fucking open the door." The lady who had been mumbling, "I need help," repeatedly like she was slurring, saw Robin stop me, and her eyes opened wide as hell and started yelling, "I need help." We jumped and said, "How can we help?" She shoved her fingers in the cracked part of the window and screamed, "Let me in." We started yelling, "Stop that," and the lady started yanking at my door handle. Robin said, "Oh hell no," and we started pulling away. I shit you not, the next 30 seconds were fucking terrifying. The lady yelled to someone, "They're leaving," and we saw two guys run out from a car parked a few cars behind us on the right. Robin sped away like a scene in an action movie. We looked in the rearview mirror and saw the three of them standing in the street. Ladies and gentlemen, please be careful. I can't imagine what could have happened to my dumbass if it weren't for my friend. I know it's in some of us to want to help, but there are a lot of evil people out there who disguise themselves to do us harm. Be aware of your surroundings and lock your doors in DC.